I owe a debt and you are its price. The words came out harsher than I intended, but Elena Rodriguez didn't flinch. She stood in the doorway of what used to be her family's cabin, her dark eyes holding a dignity that poverty couldn't touch. Behind her, the empty rooms echoed with the ghosts of laughter that would never return. I understand, Senor Morrison, she said quietly, her accent soft but clear. My father saved your life, now you save mine. I shifted uncomfortably in my saddle, a debt that had haunted me for 3 years, ever since Miguel Rodriguez pulled me from that flooding creek more dead than alive. It's not about saving, I said, dismounting. It's about doing what's right. Elena nodded, but I caught the flash of something in her eyes. Pride, maybe, or hurt. Hard to tell with a woman who'd buried her parents and 2 brothers in 6 months. The cholera had swept through the Mexican settlement like wildfire. Elena was all that remained of the Rodriguez line, and she had nowhere to go. I have very little to pack, she said, turning back toward the cabin. Take what you need, I replied, but we leave before sundown. I watched her disappear inside and wondered what the hell I was doing. Jacob Morrison, bachelor rancher, taking in a 25-year-old woman because of a debt to her dead father. The good folks of Cedar Ridge were going to have plenty to say about that. But a debt was a debt, and Miguel Rodriguez had given me more than my life that day by the creek. He'd given me hope when I had none. Elena emerged 15 minutes later with a small carpet bag and her mother's rosary clutched in her hands, everything she owned in the world reduced to what she could carry. Ready? I asked. Si, yes. She looked back at the cabin one last time, then squared her shoulders. I am ready. The ride to my ranch passed in uncomfortable silence. I'd never been good with words, especially around women, and Elena seemed lost in her own thoughts. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the prairie, and I found myself stealing glances at the woman riding beside me. She was beautiful. I'd give her that. The kind of beauty that made men do stupid things. Dark hair that caught the light, skin touched by sun and sorrow, and those eyes that seemed to see right through a person. But beauty wasn't my concern. I had a debt to pay, and I'd pay it by giving Elena Rodriguez a roof over her head and food on her table. Nothing more, nothing less. How much farther? She asked as we crested a hill. Just over the next ridge. The Morrison Ranch spread out below us like a patchwork quilt. 300 acres of the finest grazing land in Colorado territory, a 2-story house that I'd built with my own hands, and enough cattle to make a man comfortable. It wasn't the biggest spread in the territory, but it was mine. It's beautiful, Elena said softly. It'll do. I guided my horse down the slope toward home. House has 4 bedrooms. You can take the one at the end of the hall upstairs. And what will people say about a single woman living in your home? I'd been dreading that question. They'll say what they want to say. Always do. But what I didn't know was that Elena Rodriguez would bring more to my ranch than just her belongings. She would bring complications I never saw coming. As we rode into the yard, my foreman Tom Bradley emerged from the barn. Tom had worked for me for 5 years, and I'd never seen his eyes go quite that wide. Boss, he said, touching his hat brim. Ma'am. Tom, this is Miss Elena Rodriguez. She'll be staying in the house for a while. Tom's eyebrows climbed toward his hairline, but he was smart enough not to ask questions. Yes, sir. Ma'am, welcome to the Morrison Ranch. Gracias, Elena replied with a small smile. I helped her down from her horse, trying not to notice how small and delicate her hands felt in mine. Tom will see to your horse. Let me show you the house. The front door opened into a parlor that hadn't seen a woman's touch since my mother died 10 years ago. Dust covers on half the furniture, no flowers, no warmth, just the practical furnishings of a man who lived alone and liked it that way. It needs work, I admitted. It needs life, Elena corrected gently. I led her through the rooms, pointing out the kitchen, the dining room, the study where I kept my books and accounts. Upstairs, I showed her to the bedroom at the end of the hall. This was my sister's room, I said, opening the door. She married and moved to California 5 years ago. Elena stepped inside, running her fingers along the quilt on the bed. She had good taste. She had opinions about everything. The memory made me almost smile. You should know I'm not much for conversation. I work hard, eat simple, and mind my own business. I expect the same from anyone living under my roof. Of course. Elena set her bag on the bed. Senor Morrison, I want you to know that I'm grateful for. Don't. The word came out sharper than I intended. This isn't about gratitude. This is about honor. Your father saved my life, so I owe his daughter mine. It's that simple. Elena's face flushed slightly. I see. Supper's at 6, I said, backing toward the door. I'll have Tom bring up some water for washing. I fled downstairs like the devil himself was chasing me. What was wrong with me? I'd handled business deals worth thousands of dollars with more composure than I'd just shown a grieving woman who needed help. In the kitchen, I stared at the empty shelves and realized I had no idea how to feed a woman. Beans and hardtack were fine for me, but Elena Rodriguez deserved better than bachelor fare. An hour later, I was attempting to make something resembling a meal when Elena appeared in the doorway. May I help? She asked quietly. I can manage. I can see that. There was the faintest hint of amusement in her voice. But perhaps you would allow me to earn my keep? I looked at the mess I'd made of what was supposed to be beef stew and nodded reluctantly. If you insist. Elena moved around the kitchen with easy confidence. Within minutes, she'd salvaged my disaster and turned it into something that actually smelled edible. Your father, I said as she worked. He never mentioned having a daughter who could cook. There were many things my father didn't mention. Her hand stilled for a moment. He was a proud man. He wouldn't have wanted you to feel obligated. Well, I am obligated, and I pay my debts. Elena turned to face me, her dark eyes serious. And what happens when your debt is paid, Senor Morrison? What happens to me then? It was a fair question, and I didn't have a good answer for it. We'll figure that out when the time comes. But what I didn't realize was that Elena Rodriguez would change everything about my carefully ordered life, and that paying this debt would cost me far more than I ever imagined. As the sun set over the mountains and the smell of real cooking filled my house for the first time in years, I found myself wondering if taking in Miguel's daughter was the smartest thing I'd ever done, or the most dangerous. Time would tell. But sitting across from Elena at my dinner table that first night, watching the lamplight dance in her hair and hearing her soft voice fill the silence, I'd grown accustomed to, I had the unsettling feeling that my life as a solitary man was about to change forever. Whether that was a blessing or a curse remained to be seen. The first week passed like walking on eggshells. Elena moved through my house like a ghost, quiet and careful not to disturb the routines I'd built over 10 years of living alone. She cooked meals that made my mouth water, kept the place cleaner than it had ever been, and asked for nothing. It was driving me crazy. Morning, I said, coming down to find breakfast already on the table and Elena nowhere to be seen. Buenos dias, came her soft voice from the kitchen. She appeared with a cup of coffee, set it down without looking at me, and retreated again. I ate in silence, listening to the sounds of her moving around, cleaning up after me like I was some kind of invalid. When I finished, I grabbed my hat and headed for the door. I'll be checking the north pasture today, I called out. Si, Senor Morrison. That was it. That was all I got. 3 words and a retreat. But what I didn't know was that Elena was fighting battles of her own, trying to find her place in a world that had turned upside down. I spent the morning writing fence lines, but my mind wasn't on the work. It kept drifting back to the house, to the woman who moved through it like she was afraid to leave footprints. Tom Bradley rode up around noon, his face wearing that expression he got when he had something to say but wasn't sure he should say it. Speak your piece, Tom. It's about the lady, boss. I kept my eyes on the fence post I was examining. What about her? Well, it's just that folks in town are talking. Let them talk. They're saying she's your woman, living under your roof without benefit of marriage and all. My jaw tightened. Elena Rodriguez is under my protection, nothing more. I know that, boss. You know that. But people are people. I straightened up, meeting his eyes. Anyone has a problem with my arrangements, they can take it up with me directly. Tom nodded quickly. Yes, sir, just thought you should know. But he was right. In a territory where reputation mattered more than gold, having Elena under my roof was going to cause problems, for both of us. That evening I came home to find Elena in the garden behind the house, kneeling among the wild roses my mother had planted years ago. She'd cleared away the weeds and was trying to bring life back to the neglected flowers. They're beautiful, she said when she noticed me watching. My mother's pride and joy. I stood awkwardly, not sure whether to stay or go. She said a house without flowers wasn't a home. Elena looked up at me. Dirt smudged on her cheek. She was wise. She was stubborn, like all the women in my family. A small smile played at Elena's lips. Perhaps that is not such a bad thing. It was the first real conversation we'd had since she arrived, and I found myself reluctant to end it. Elena, I said, surprising myself by using her first name. About what people are saying. Her smile faded. I have heard the whispers in town. You've been to town? Yesterday, for supplies. Mrs. Patterson at the general store made her feelings quite clear. Elena's voice was steady, but I caught the hurt underneath. She thinks I am a, how do you say, woman of loose morals. Anger flared in my chest. Mrs. Patterson is a narrow-minded busybody, but she speaks for many, no? Elena stood, brushing dirt from her hands. I do not wish to bring shame to your name, Senor Morrison. Perhaps I should. You should nothing, I interrupted. This is your home for as long as you need it. Let them talk. Elena studied my face in the fading light. Why? Why do you care what happens to me? It was a fair question, and I wasn't sure I knew the answer. Because your father saved my life. Because everyone deserves a second chance. Because... I stopped, not sure how to finish that sentence. Because, she prompted gently. Because you make the house feel alive again, I admitted, the words coming out rough and uncertain, and I'd forgotten what that felt like. Something shifted in Elena's expression, a softness I hadn't seen before. Jacob, she said, and hearing my name on her lips did something strange to my chest. We should go in, I said quickly, stepping back. It's getting cold. But as we walked toward the house together, I realized that the cold had nothing to do with the weather and everything to do with the distance I was trying to keep between us. That night I lay awake listening to Elena moving around upstairs getting ready for bed. Every creak of the floorboards reminded me that there was a beautiful woman living under my roof, and that my feelings about that were getting more complicated by the day. 3 days later the complications got worse. I was in the barn when Tom came running up, his face pale. Boss, you need to come quick. There's a man at the house asking for Miss Rodriguez. I dropped the harness I was mending and followed Tom outside. A stranger sat on horseback in front of my house, well dressed but with the kind of eyes that made my skin crawl. Elena stood on the porch, her face white as snow. Can I help you? I called out as I approached. The man turned to me with an oily smile. You must be Morrison. I'm Richard Blackwood. I've come about the Rodriguez woman. What about her? Well, you see, her father owed me money. Quite a bit of money, actually. Blackwood pulled out a piece of paper. This document makes his debts my property, including any assets he might have left behind. My blood turned to ice. Assets? His daughter, of course. She belongs to me now. Elena made a sound like a wounded animal, and something murderous rose up in my chest. Get off my land, I said quietly. Blackwood's smile widened. I'm afraid that's not how the law works, Morrison. A debt is a debt. And that was when I realized that paying my debt to Miguel Rodriguez was going to cost me more than I'd ever imagined, because somewhere along the way, Elena had stopped being just an obligation. She'd become something worth fighting for. She belongs to no one, I said, my hand moving instinctively to the gun at my hip. Blackwood chuckled, but his eyes stayed cold. The law might disagree with you, Morrison. Miguel Rodriguez borrowed $500 from my bank 3 years ago. When he died, his debts became collectible against his estate. Elena isn't property. In the eyes of the law, she's all that's left to settle the debt. He waved the paper again. I have a legal claim. Elena stepped forward, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. I will go with him, Jacob. I won't bring trouble to your house. Like hell you will. The words came out with more force than I intended. You're under my protection. Your protection means nothing against the law, Blackwood said smoothly. But I'm a reasonable man. Perhaps we can come to an arrangement. I didn't like the sound of that. What kind of arrangement? You pay the debt plus interest, and I'll tear up this document. $500 becomes, let's say $800, given the time that's passed. $800. Nearly everything I had saved. But looking at Elena's pale face, at the way she held herself like she was preparing for a blow, I found I didn't care about the money. And if I refuse? Blackwood's smile turned predatory. Then I'll be back with the sheriff. The choice is yours, Morrison. But what I didn't know was that this moment would force me to confront feelings I'd been trying to ignore for weeks. After Blackwood rode away with promises to return in 3 days for his answer, Elena and I stood in heavy silence. The afternoon sun felt cold on my shoulders. You cannot pay that money for me, Elena said finally. That's my decision to make. No, she turned to face me, her dark eyes blazing. I will not be bought and sold like cattle. I have been enough of a burden. You're not a burden. What am I then? The question hung between us like a challenge. What am I to you, Jacob Morrison? I opened my mouth, then closed it. What was she to me? More than an obligation, that much I knew, but admitting that felt like stepping off a cliff. I struggled for words. You're important. Important how? Before I could answer, Tom Bradley came around the corner of the house, his face grim. Boss, we got problems. Just rode past the Rodriguez place. Someone's been there, tearing it apart. My blood chilled. Blackwood? Most likely, looking for anything of value, I'd guess. Elena made a small sound of distress. My mother's things, the few belongings I couldn't carry. Without thinking, I reached for her hand. We'll go look, see what's left. The ride to the Rodriguez cabin felt like a funeral procession. Elena sat rigid in her saddle, her face a mask of controlled emotion. When we crested the hill and saw the destruction below, she made a sound like a wounded animal. The cabin had been ransacked. Furniture overturned, belongings scattered across the yard. Even the small garden Elena's mother had tended was torn up, as if Blackwood's men had been looking for buried treasure. Elena dismounted and walked slowly through the wreckage. She knelt beside a broken wooden cross, gathering the pieces with shaking hands. My father carved this, she whispered, for my first communion. I watched her try to fit the pieces back together, and something broke open in my chest. This woman had lost everything. Her family, her home, her past, and now even the memories were being destroyed. Elena, I said softly. She looked up at me, tears streaming down her face. Why? Why must they take even this? I knelt beside her in the dirt, not caring about my knees or my dignity, because some men think they can own whatever they want. But they're wrong. Are they? Senor Blackwood has papers. He has the law. The law isn't always right. I helped her to her feet, my hands gentle on her arms, and I won't let him take you. Why? The word came out broken. Why do you care what happens to me? And suddenly, in that moment, surrounded by the wreckage of her past, I knew. I'd known for weeks, maybe since that first night when she'd made my cold house feel like a home. Because I love you, I said simply. Elena's eyes went wide. Jacob, I know it's not what either of us planned. I know you came to me because you had nowhere else to go, but somewhere along the way you stopped being just Miguel's daughter to me. What am I now? Everything. The word came out rough, honest. You're everything I never knew I wanted. Elena searched my face, looking for something. Whatever she found there made her step closer. I love you too, she whispered. But love doesn't change the law. Love doesn't make Blackwood's claim disappear. Maybe not, but love gives me a reason to fight. I cupped her face in my hands, thumbs wiping away her tears. Marry me, Elena. What? Marry me today. Right now. If you're my wife, Blackwood can't touch you. Elena stared at me, hope and fear warring in her expression. You would do that? Marry me to protect me? I'd marry you because I can't imagine my life without you in it. The protection is just, I smiled slightly, a bonus. But what we didn't realize was that Richard Blackwood was closer than we thought, and that he'd heard every word. A slow clap echoed across the clearing. We spun to see Blackwood emerging from behind the cabin, his face wearing a triumphant smile. How touching, he said mockingly. But I'm afraid marriage won't solve your problem, Morrison. A man's wife isn't responsible for her father's debts, I said, stepping protectively in front of Elena. True, but a dead man's daughter is. Blackwood pulled out another document. This is Miguel Rodriguez's death certificate. It clearly states he died owing money to my bank. Elena Rodriguez inherited that debt the moment he drew his last breath. My heart sank. Marriage doesn't erase existing debts. Precisely. So you see, your romantic gesture is meaningless. She still belongs to me. Elena stepped around me, her chin raised defiantly. I belong to no one, senor. Not to you, not to any man. We'll see about that. Blackwood mounted his horse. 3 days, Morrison. $800 or I come back with the law. As he rode away, Elena turned to me with tears in her eyes. Jacob, you cannot sacrifice everything for me. Watch me, I said fiercely. I told you I'd pay my debts. Well, I've got a new debt now, to you, to us. What debt? The debt of love. And that's one I'll spend the rest of my life trying to repay. But even as I held her close, I knew our troubles were just beginning. Blackwood was right about one thing: love alone wouldn't be enough to save us. We were going to need a miracle. 2 days passed like a death sentence hanging over our heads. I spent every waking hour trying to figure a way out of this mess. $800 might as well have been $8,000 for all the good it did me. Even if I sold half my cattle, I'd barely raise $600, and that would cripple the ranch for years. Elena hadn't spoken much since Blackwood's ultimatum. She moved through the house like a ghost, cooking meals neither of us had appetite for, tending the garden with hands that shook when she thought I wasn't looking. On the morning of the third day, I found her in the kitchen before dawn, packing food into a traveling bag. "Where do you think you're going?" I asked. She didn't look up from her work. "I will not let you destroy yourself for me, Jacob. When Blackwood comes today, I will go with him." "Like hell you will. You cannot stop me." Her voice was steady, but I caught the tremor underneath. "This is my choice to make." I crossed the room in 2 strides and grabbed her shoulders, forcing her to look at me. "You think I'd let you sacrifice yourself? After everything we've said to each other? What we said doesn't matter if you lose everything fighting for me. You are everything." The words came out fierce, desperate. "Don't you understand that yet?" Elena's composure finally cracked. Tears spilled down her cheeks as she collapsed against my chest. "I love you too much to watch you ruined." I held her tight, breathing in the scent of her hair, memorizing the feel of her in my arms. "Then trust me. I've got a plan." "What plan?" Before I could answer, the sound of horses echoed across the yard. Through the kitchen window I saw not just Blackwood but the sheriff and 2 deputies riding up to the house. "Stay inside," I told Elena. "Jacob, stay inside." I kissed her forehead, then grabbed my gun belt from the hook by the door. "And trust me." I stepped onto the porch to face them. Sheriff Morrison, no relation, despite the name, tipped his hat grimly. "Jake, sorry about this, but Mr. Blackwood's got papers." "I know." I kept my voice level. "He also knows I've got 3 days to pay." Blackwood checked his pocket watch with theatrical precision. "Actually, it's been exactly 72 hours since I made my offer." "Time's up, Morrison." "Not quite." I pulled out my own piece of paper. "This is a bank draft for $800 drawn on the First National Bank of Denver." The sheriff looked surprised. Blackwood's face darkened. "Where did you get that kind of money?" "I sold my cattle to the army. Emergency beef contract." It was a lie, but delivered with enough confidence to sound convincing. They paid in advance. But what I didn't tell them was that the bank draft was real, but the money behind it wasn't mine to give. Blackwood snatched the paper from my hand, examining it closely. "This appears genuine." "It is, so we're done here." "Not quite." Blackwood's smile returned, cold and predatory. "You see, there's been a development. Yesterday I received word that Miguel Rodriguez actually owed more than I initially calculated. Interest compounds, you understand. The true amount is now $1,200. My blood turned to ice. "That's not what you said 3 days ago." "I said at least 800. Further investigation revealed additional debts." He pulled out yet another document. "All legal and binding." Sheriff Morrison looked uncomfortable. "That don't seem right, Blackwood." "The law is the law, Sheriff. A debt is a debt." But what Blackwood didn't know was that someone had been listening to our entire conversation. "Actually," came a voice from behind us, "there is no debt." We all turned to see an elderly Mexican man riding up the path, his weathered face set with determination. Behind him rode Father Miguel from the church in town. Elena gasped from the doorway. "Tío Carlos?" The old man dismounted slowly, his eyes fixed on Blackwood. "See, Mia, I am here." "Who the hell are you?" Blackwood demanded. "Carlos Rodriguez. Miguel's brother." The old man's English was careful but clear. "And I have something you need to see." He pulled out a faded piece of paper, handling it like something precious. "This is my brother's last will, written the day before he died, witnessed by Father Miguel." The priest nodded solemnly. "I can attest to its authenticity," Carlos continued, his voice growing stronger. "In this will my brother states that any debts he owed should be settled by the sale of his land to the Mexican settlement. The land sold 3 days ago, for exactly $800. He handed another paper to the sheriff. "This is the bill of sale. The debt has been paid in full." Blackwood's face turned red. That's impossible. I would have heard. You would have heard if you bothered to check with the Mexican community before making your claims, Father Miguel said quietly. But you assumed we were ignorant of the law. Sheriff Morrison examined the documents carefully. These look legal to me, Blackwood. Seems like the debt's been settled. But what about, Blackwood began. What about nothing? I interrupted. Your claim is void. Elena doesn't owe you anything. Blackwood's eyes darted between the papers, the sheriff, and the growing crowd of my ranch hands who had gathered to watch. Finally, his shoulders sagged in defeat. This isn't over, he muttered, mounting his horse. Yes, it is, Elena said, stepping onto the porch beside me. It's over. As Blackwood and his men rode away, Carlos smiled at his niece. Your father asked me to watch over you, Mia. I'm sorry it took me so long to find you. Elena ran to him, embracing the old man with tears streaming down her face. Tío Carlos, I thought you were dead. The cholera. I was in Santa Fe when the sickness came. When I returned, he shook his head sadly. I have been searching for you ever since. Father Miguel approached me with a knowing smile. Mr. Morrison, might I suggest that while we're all gathered here it would be a good time for a wedding? Elena and I looked at each other across the yard. The danger was past, the debt was settled, but nothing had changed about how we felt. Elena, I said, walking toward her. I know this all started because of an obligation to your father, but I want you to know that you have a choice now. You're free to go with your uncle, to start fresh wherever you want. She studied my face for a long moment. And what do you want, Jacob Morrison? I want you to marry me, not because of debts or obligations or protection, but because I love you, and I can't imagine my life without you in it. Elena smiled, the first real smile I'd seen from her in days. Then ask me properly. I dropped to one knee right there in the dirt, in front of God and her uncle and half the territory. Elena Rodriguez, will you marry me? See, she said, laughing through her tears. Yes, I will marry you. As Father Miguel began talking about wedding arrangements and Carlos started questioning my intentions toward his niece, I caught Elena's hand and pulled her aside. That bank draft, she said quietly. Where did the money really come from? I smiled sheepishly. I may have mortgaged the ranch to the bank in Denver. Jacob, you could have lost everything. I was going to lose everything anyway if you weren't here to share it with. Elena shook her head, but she was smiling. You are either the bravest man I know or the most foolish. Maybe both. But what we didn't realize was that in saving each other, we had found something neither of us had been looking for when this all began. We'd found home. We'd found family. We'd found love that was worth any risk, any sacrifice, any debt. As the sun set over the mountains and Father Miguel began planning our wedding ceremony, I knew that Miguel Rodriguez's debt to me had been paid in full, but now I had a new debt, to Elena, to love, to the future we would build together. And that was a debt I would spend the rest of my life happily paying. 3 weeks later I truly stood in the little church in Cedar Ridge, watching Elena walk down the aisle toward me in her mother's wedding dress. Father Miguel had spent the better part of a month, restoring the delicate lace and silk that Carlos had carefully preserved all these years. Elena looked like an angel, her dark hair crowned with white roses from the garden we'd planted together. But it was her eyes that took my breath away. Those same dark eyes that had held such dignity in the doorway of her ruined cabin now shone with joy and love and the promise of our future together. Dearly beloved, Father Miguel began, his voice carrying to every corner of the packed church. We are gathered here today to witness the union of Jacob Morrison and Elena Rodriguez in holy matrimony. I barely heard the words. My attention was focused entirely on the woman standing beside me, her small hand trembling slightly in mine. 3 months ago I'd thought I was paying a debt. Now I knew I'd been given the greatest gift of my life. Jacob, Father Miguel prompted gently. Your vows? I turned to her, my voice steady, despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm me. Elena, when I took you in, I thought I was settling a debt to your father, but what I got instead was so much more than I deserved. Her eyes glistened with unshed tears. You brought life to my house, warmth to my heart, and love to my soul. I promise to protect you, cherish you, and love you all my days. Not because I owe you anything, but because I choose you. Every day I choose you. Elena's voice was soft but clear as she spoke her own vows. Jacob, you gave me shelter when I had nowhere, but more than that you gave me hope when I thought I had lost everything. You saw me not as a burden to be carried, but as a woman to be loved. She squeezed my hands tighter. I promise to stand beside you through whatever storms may come. To make our house a home filled with laughter and love. To choose you as you have chosen me, every day for the rest of our lives. By the power vested in me, Father Miguel said with a broad smile, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Jacob, you may kiss your bride. I cupped Elena's face in my hands, thumbs brushing away the happy tears that had spilled over. When I kissed her, the entire congregation erupted in cheers and applause, but all I could hear was the sound of my heart finally finding its home. The celebration afterward spilled out onto the church grounds and continued well into the evening. Carlos had brought musicians from the Mexican settlement, and their music filled the air with songs of joy. Tom Bradley, slightly drunk on wedding whiskey, made a toast that brought tears to Elena's eyes and laughter from everyone else. The same woman who had whispered about Elena's morals just weeks before now pressed a beautiful quilt into her hands. Made it myself, she said gruffly. Every new bride needs something special for her hope chest. Elena hugged the older woman, and I saw Mrs. Patterson's stern expression soften. Thank you, Elena whispered. It's beautiful. You make that stubborn man of yours happy, you hear? Mrs. Patterson replied. Lord knows he's been needing some joy in his life. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Elena and I finally found ourselves alone on the porch of our home. Any regrets? I asked, settling beside her on the porch swing I'd built as a wedding gift. Only one, Elena said, and my heart skipped a beat until she continued. I regret that my parents couldn't be here to see this day. My father would have been so proud to know that his act of kindness led to such happiness. I pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. I think he knows, and I think he's glad his debt was paid with love instead of obligation. Elena tilted her face up to look at me. What happens now, mi amor? What do we do with all this happiness? Now we build a life together. We work the ranch, tend the garden, maybe fill some of those empty bedrooms with children. The thought of little ones with Elena's eyes and stubborn chin made my chest tight with longing. Children. Elena's voice held wonder and hope. If you want them, if we're blessed with them. I want them, she said softly. I want to give you sons and daughters who will know they are loved without question, without debt, without obligation. They'll know, I promised. Because they'll see how much their parents love each other. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Carlos approached the porch with Father Miguel. Both men wore expressions of deep satisfaction. The celebration continues at the settlement, Carlos said. But an old man needs his rest. Mija, are you happy? Elena rose and embraced her uncle, the man who had saved us all with his timely arrival. Happier than I ever dreamed possible, Tio. Good. Your father's spirit can rest easy now, knowing you are loved and protected. Carlos turned to me, his weathered hand gripping my shoulder. Take care of our treasure, Jacob Morrison. With my life, I promised. After they left, Elena and I sat in comfortable silence, listening to the distant music and laughter from the settlement. The night air was cool, filled with the scent of roses and the promise of rain. Jacob, Elena said suddenly, do you really think we would have found each other if not for the debt? If not for my father saving your life? I considered it for a moment. I don't know. Maybe we would have met in town or at a church social. Maybe you would have caught my eye at the spring dance. And would you have been brave enough to court me then, without obligation forcing your hand? I laughed. Probably not. I was a stubborn bachelor, convinced I didn't need anyone. It might have taken years for me to work up the courage to speak to you. Then I am grateful for the debt, Elena said firmly. Grateful that circumstances brought us together, even if the path was difficult. Are you? Even knowing what it cost? The fear, the uncertainty, the threat from Blackwood. Elena was quiet for a long moment, her head resting against my shoulder. The pain made the joy sweeter, she said finally. The fear made love more precious. I would walk that path again, knowing it led to this moment. I tightened my arms around her, overwhelmed by the depth of feeling this woman inspired in me. I love you, Elena Morrison. And I love you, mi esposo, my husband. As if summoned by our words, a gentle rain began to fall, pattering softly on the porch roof and filling the air with the fresh scent of earth and growing things. Elena laughed, holding out her hand to catch the drops. Rain on our wedding day, she said. My mother always said that was good luck. Then we'll have nothing but good fortune from here on out. Elena turned in my arms, her face glowing in the lamplight from the window. Jacob, I need to tell you something. My heart skipped. What? The debt your father mentioned, the one that brought us together, I know now that it was meant to be, not because of obligation or honor, but because God wanted us to find each other. You think so? I know so. Because what we have now isn't about what anyone owes anyone else. It's about choice. It's about love freely given and received. She was right. Somewhere along the way, debt had transformed into devotion, obligation had become affection, and duty had blossomed.